My name's Kim. I'm a licensed and nationally certified Chinese medical provider and a Taoist practitioner. And today we're doing another episode of Hashtag Half Truths, where we're going to go and look at the House committee hearing on that paper, The Proximal Origins of COVID-19. And what's really great about today is we have Claire Donovan, investigative reporter for Hashtag Half Truths, with us. Hey, Claire, tell us what's going on with that paper.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you about the latest House committee hearing about that paper, The Proximal Origins of COVID-19, that was published by Nature's Journal back in March of 2020.
Claire, that paper was a pretty significant paper for the pandemic, wasn't it?
Definitely. This paper really framed the discussion of COVID-19 and its origins all the way up until June of 2023, when Rochelle Walensky stepped down from leading the CDC.
What was it about this paper that made it so important?
Well, probably the most interesting thing about this paper was who the authors were. It was literally a who's who of evolutionary and viral scientists from across the world. And I think the thing that was really interesting was that these 5 scientists who had been in management for decades and hadn't been in the lab were wrote a paper that actually went against the grain. So when so many scientists were coming out and stating that this was a genetically modified virus, these 5 scientists came out and said that they could conclusively state that this virus was a natural evolution. Amazing, huh? And then they took it just one step further, and maybe not them, but the paper was used to take it just one step further. And any scientific research that came out that went against this narrative was not allowed to be published. In fact, it was censored. In fact, the scientists were censored. And then this paper went a little bit further, and anybody on social media who would come out and state something against this proximal origin of COVID paper, they would get censored.
I remember that time frame. So between November 2019 and February 2020, I had some Western medical friends who were sending me some of the video out of China that, was going underground, that was later censored, of what was happening in the pandemic. After the genome was released, they were sending me some of the research reports from scientists across the world. In January of 2021, I went back to pull out a couple of those research reports. And do you know, there's like this huge hole from February 2020 to December 2018 in my Facebook Messenger. Those messages are just gone. Nothing else is gone. Just that time period at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes, there was a lot going on at that time. And it wasn't just about science. It was about public policy too. So, let me give you an example. Let me give you a model of what was happening at that time. It's a really simplistic model, but at least it gives you a general outline of what was going on at the time. So this first circle here, this is going to be the government. And then this second circle, that's going to be industry. And then this third really big circle, that's going to be you and me and the public. And then I'm going to overlay public policy on top of that. And you can see within that circle, government has a huge say in that, and industry has a huge say in that. And then you and I, we have a little say in that. Keeping that in mind, it's really interesting to look at who the participants were that organized and drafted and wrote this paper. Notice anything interesting about this group? Maybe why this paper is getting mired in so much public policy debate is because this group of individuals completely lacked any diversity. And it's really easy to get wrapped up in groupthink when you all look the same and you all come from the same social and economic class. Jeremy Farrar has been identified as the original organizer of this group of individuals and instrumental in guiding these scientists in writing this paper. And who Jeremy Farrar is he is he was the CEO of Welcome, one of the second largest private charitable organization in medical research in the world. So $37 billion in assets, very well connected. I guess my only comment to Dr. Farrar is that maybe you need to expand your social circle just a little bit. Maybe if your committee just had a little bit of diversity on it, these individuals wouldn't find themselves up in front of the House of Representatives today.
Oh, I hear ya. If I was going to pick somebody who I knew wasn't going to get wrapped up in groupthink and who was going to follow the science no matter where it led, I think you'd have to go for a diversity candidate, right? And I would pick Dr. Judy Mikovits, the author of Plague of Corruption, Restoring Faith in the Promise of Science. Yeah, that's who I would pick.
Oh, truly. Now there's somebody who sticks to her guns and follows science, even in the face of certain death. Judy, I got your back. I got your back.
For those of you who aren't familiar with Dr. Judy Mikovits and that book, so she was instrumental in science that actually identified some of the ways that I believe it was the MMR vaccine, some of the ways that actually did cause genetic or cause damage to children. The book goes through this incredible level of suppression from the scientific community to hide this information. And in fact, she's probably the first one who calls out Dr. Anthony Fauci for suppressing information.
Oh, I know. I read that too. And I thought, girl, there's no coming back from that.
After her book was published, there's this storm of negative press. This completely unknown scientist suddenly explodes across social media and the press. And there's these stories about her ethics and her scientific skill sets that are brought into question.
Oh, the press came out and made it sound like having your paper retracted was something that didn't happen, like it doesn't happen every day. Like there isn't a database out there to help track all the retractions that happen on a daily basis in science.
I think it was these studies on the vaccine injury that she refused to retract. And that brought in these very powerful people in positions of authority that just destroyed her. And I've heard she's actually a very talented scientist, a genius level kind of person, and she's obviously a liver constitution. Those people are going to stand for justice no matter what the cost.
Oh, yep, I totally agree. Dr. Farrar, you needed to have Dr. Mikovits on that committee. When this whole thing started, I didn't really know who these individuals were. Jeremy Farrar was the head of Wellcome, which is the second largest private charitable trust that donates research grants to science. Very powerful positions. Now, Dr. Farrar, he just recently stepped down from Wellcome to accept a position in the World Health Organization. But here's the thing, public policy, obviously he's very focused on public policy, but public policy and science can be very different at times. Being that part of Dr. Farrar's job was public policy, part of his responsibility was going to be bringing together people to work on global problems. And the pandemic was a global problem at the time, and it was made more complicated because of the politics in the US at the time. And there were things that we didn't know about at the time. When it came out later, we didn't know that the NIH had been funding research with China for over a decade on modifying coronaviruses.
True, true. I'm pretty sure China was pretty surprised that our president started calling it the China virus instead of taking his lumps like everybody else. So, do you think the paper might have been the easy option? Because there was a lot of egos involved in this, from Dr. Anthony Fauci to President Trump to China, and maybe saying it was naturally evolved was the easiest option.
It could be. It could be. It seems like there was a number of scientists that thought so. And it seems like there was a lot of individuals who wanted to keep things hidden. Ultimately, as time goes by, we're going to learn more and more about this, and pulling these 5 scientists into a committee hearing to talk about a paper that they authored didn't really accomplish anything. If anything, those scientists just doubled down on their opinion piece, because to do anything else would be political suicide.
I'm sure Dr. Fauci is breathing a sigh of relief after that committee hearing, because the scientists came out rather well on that.
I agree. There wasn't really the smoking gun that the House committee thought they had.
Claire, wasn't one of the real problems with this paper was how it was used, the narrative that it set up, and how it was used to censor social media, to censor science, to censor research?
That was probably one of the most tragic consequences of this paper. And when we look at the who's list in the scientific community, well, these individuals, they control the lion's share of all research funding in the world. These individuals are very well connected with not just scientists, but with the journals. And when we look at Nature Journal, well, they originally rejected this paper. And then here we have Dr. Farrar gives them a call, and then they agree to publish it.
That's part of the concern we're facing today, is just how much control individuals have over the narrative, and who gets to determine the truth.
That is part of the problem, but it isn't being addressed, right? As we said earlier, this paper was used to censor scientists, and we've found out recently that many of these scientists who were working on the virus or the vaccine, that they were under gag orders, so they couldn't even talk about their research. And what is it, that court case that just recently, the injunction against the government, we found that this paper may have had very far reaching impacts on what you and I can say on social media.
That court case, the run up to that July court injunction that stopped certain government agencies from communicating with social media, I think the run up to that injunction, there was becoming this just tremendous amount of censorship of people on social media, and a lot of censorship of mainstream sheeple like myself. I think this level of censorship started to backfire on these social media platforms, because I don't think they were prepared for how sheeple handled this. And sheeple do what sheeple do. They gathered together and they about the censorship, and then they took their content and they moved it to a private website where they more about the censorship, even publishing the communications from the companies. The mob was starting to turn on these platforms, and these social media platforms were creating another very difficult situation.
Yes, I hope the original intent of this paper was not to start some Orwellian process of censorship like the House committee hearing suggests. But, after the paper was out there in the wild and it was being used for these nefarious ends, well, these scientists, they just had to back this paper in ways that they might not have originally intended.
I don't know how you feel about this, but I was rather disappointed in all our representatives, because for me, the true issue here is gain of function research and the intentional modification of genetic material to make it more deadly and the potential harm that can do to the world.
I agree. There is not a consensus from our intelligence community or from the scientific community on whether this was genetically modified or whether it was natural evolution. And more evidence continues to surface, including patents on pieces of the spike protein, which lend more credence to the genetically modified concept. But you're right. Focusing on whether our 10 years of funding EcoHealth Alliance and their coronavirus enhancement helped create this virus or not has been taking our attention away and keeping us distracted from addressing the true issue, which is going to be gain of function research. Should we be funding gain of function research, or are there certain subsets of gain of function that we just should not be doing? So, yes, I am disappointed in both the Democrats and the Republicans. I'm disappointed in the Democrats because their desire to support this paper at all costs ignores the very real fact that many U.S. citizens know that they have been hurt by the virus or the vaccine, and that this paper was part of that hurt. This paper exemplifies the collusion between government and industry that leads to very real hurts to citizens like you and I. And then I'm really disappointed in the Republicans because they are not there to help us. They are there to gain political points. And if they were there to help us, they would have turned this conversation immediately to gain of function instead of trying to crucify anybody on the cross. We would be talking about if gain of function is something that we should be doing. By spending time trying to gain political votes, you and I are once again chess pieces in a very deadly game. And then the question is, who wins when our political parties are constantly infighting? Because it's not you and I. By encouraging this type of infighting, it seems like the only individuals winning on this are going to be the extremely wealthy, because by keeping us divided and fighting with each other, then that keeps us distracted from addressing the true issue, which is, in this situation, gain of function research. And maybe that's what they want, because it seems like the wealthy live by different rules than you and I.
That may be the point. As long as you can create controversy on anything, then create it on everything. Keep the population distracted and at odds with each other, because then they can't do anything. Claire, thanks so much for coming out and talking with us today.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Okay, and that wraps up another episode of #HalfTruths. And until next time, I'll catch you on the other side.